A very good morning and welcome to the 23rd meeting of the Criminal Justice Committee in 2025. We've got no apologies this morning and Fulton McGregor is joining us online. So our first item of business this morning is to continue our inquiry into the harm caused by substance use in Scottish prisons. So today's session gives us the opportunity to take evidence from the main public bodies responsible for such matters in our prisons. So I'm pleased to welcome the following witnesses. So we're joined by Leona Paget, Prison Healthcare Lead with Falkirk Health and Social Care Partnership, Rhoda MacLeod, Head of Adult Services at Glasgow City Health and Social Care Partnership, Linda Pollock, Deputy Chief Executive, Sarah Angus, Director of Policy, and Susie Calder, Head of Health and Wellbeing at the Scottish Prison Service. So a warm welcome to you all, and I refer members to papers 1, 2 and 3. So I intend to allow up to 2 hours for this session. So if I can begin with an open question, and I'll come to my left, so I'll come to Leona first of all, and I'll work my way across the panel. We've heard evidence that strategies don't always translate into a change in practice and that there are issues often with implementation. So I wonder if you could set out how you intend to ensure that the necessary strategies are implemented, and is it possible to do this given the current prison population levels? So I'll maybe come to Leona first of all.
Thank you. I do think it is possible to implement strategies, and as a lead for prison healthcare, we have to have those strategies to work towards so that your staff teams and all your agencies and partners are working towards the same direction. I think there's many strategies that we need to work towards: mental health, suicide, prevention of suicide, health strategies around physical health and rehabilitation. But to be able to implement them fully, I do think that has to be collaboration at every level, from the top right down to the bottom, to make sure that we are working towards the same aims, or as collaboratively as possible, that we all know what each partner or agency is trying to do and what their aims are and what their objectives are, so that we can work together.
Okay, thank you very much. Rhoda.
Hi, good morning. I agree that, the strategies are absolutely necessary, but there are challenges with implementation. For example, we do have the MAT standards that help us focus in terms of how we manage support medical assisted treatment within prisons, as well as in the community. There is work ongoing just now with regard to commencing with regard to focusing on prisons and looking at how we can implement the MAT standards in their fullest. There is work to be done in terms of that connectivity with community services, particularly around liberation. I think some of the challenges within prisons are different from the community as well, and I think committee need to give some thought to that. The type of substance use, the nature of it within prisons is quite different in some respects to what is happening in the community. Not entirely, but there are differences. And I do think there are resource issues for services both within SPS and within the health service in terms of how we can effectively address the substance misuse challenges that we have across our prisons. That's certainly my experience or our experience in Greater Glasgow and Clyde. So I do think, yes, we work very, very hard and we work in partnership with SPS. There's good, close partnership working, and that's absolutely essential for taking any strategies forward. But there are unique challenges, I think, that need to be given careful consideration, and there might be something that comes out of this work that says there's a particular strategy for how we should be dealing with the substance abuse challenges within the prison setting.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of things I'll maybe come back to, Rhoda. Thank you for that. Linda.
Good morning, and first of all, thank you for having us today, and thank you for the inquiry that you're looking at Obviously, as the Prison Service, we really welcome the interest that you're taking in substance misuse within prisons, and all the evidence that you've taken and the views from our colleagues and from the third sector, because in everything we are seeking to improve the care that we give for people, and so very keen to hear your findings and the evidence that has come through from that. I'll let my colleagues pick up particularly around our alcohol and drug strategy. What I would comment on just at the start is that the implementation of every strategy, as Leona and Rhoda have said, has to be done in partnership with our colleagues in NHS and with third sector, which we try very hard across the estate to work towards. But overcrowding absolutely does have an impact on how much we can do on a day-to-day basis. I know a number of you were able to visit HMP Edinburgh, and yourselves, Convener and Mr Kerr, were able to go to HMP Grampian, so you'll have seen for yourselves the impact that has. I know you heard last week from our colleagues in the Prison Officers Association. You have seen, I hope, firsthand how much our staff care about the people within our care and how much of our work is dependent on relationships. And actually the implementation of a lot of our strategies is dependent on building relationships and having the time and capability to do that. And whilst we are so full and with overcrowding and the numbers at the rate that they are, that makes that job ever more hard. And particularly looking at where we are with substance misuse as well, seeing the substances that are coming in, the difficulty that is having, it again makes it more difficult for all of us, I think, as partners, to be able to prevent, to identify, to spot and to care for people. So I'm sure we'll pick up on overcrowding as well, but it does have a significant impact on how we deliver our strategies at this time.
And I think we're interested in just what that impact is, and we'll hopefully tease that out during the meeting. Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everyone. I think it would be naive of anybody to think a strategy or a policy or something written on a bit of paper will magically translate into implementation. So I think as an organisation we are absolutely aware of that. As Director of Policy, I'm also clearly aware of that in terms of what we write. It's why it's important to both myself, the people within my directorate and the organisation, that we embed our strategy and our policies in operational reality, and that we then look to understand what impact we are trying to achieve, and we look to then measure that impact. And I understand the committee will want to focus on our alcohol and drug strategy, but it is also clear, and my colleagues this morning have mentioned, that this is about relationships, it's also about mental well-being. There is no easy way to address everything together, and what we have to do as an organisation is try to ensure that our policies talk to each other, and that is a key focus for us at the moment and moving forward, so that we simplify things and we bring it to operational reality, but also within that relationships are key, and not just with our partners but also the people within our care, which is it's a theme that runs through all of the development of our policies. If we don't understand relationships between ourselves and our partners, and we don't understand our relationships between ourselves and the individuals that are in prison, then we will not achieve operational implementation of policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Susie.
Good morning. Thank you. It's nice to be back. We have two key strategies, obviously the alcohol and drug strategy and the mental health strategy that committee have been aware of as part of the inquiry, and both of them are critical, and both of you have read them. You'll note that there is an overlap and an interface around how we develop and we implement recovery as a base. And as Sarah has outlined, for us it's about how do we make sure that the implementation works at local level and operationally. Both our strategies were drafted in extensive consultation with a range of partners. None of them can be written on and then implemented in isolation, and we do require that buy-in and that support from all our colleagues across both statutory and non-statutory organisations to try and support implementation. What I would say, although it's really challenging, both our strategies are 10 years in length for a reason, because they are ambitious and they were to be able to be flexed to ensure that we were able to underpin with some very clear baseline activity that supports people. So we would also want to highlight that although the strategies have only just been published, work is still ongoing. There are still activities and recovery activities that exist within the organisation that reflect the ethos and the principles that we've already embedded within the strategies. Our teams at the moment are building on an implementation plan that will be realistic and will be done in partnership with all our colleagues, and particularly our operational colleagues, around what is and what is not possible. And also our team are involved in being able to, I suppose, demystify some of the language that sits around strategy about what that looks like in practice. So what our recovery intervention might look like, how a CAFE might be involved, where does our AA partner sit, so it doesn't feel like it's one person or one part of the organisation that's delivering on it. It's clearly challenging, it's clearly difficult when people are really busy to do a lot of the work, but some parts of the strategy are very much focused on how staff interact and build relationships with people, and fundamentally that's at the root of everything we do.
Thank you. I wonder if I can just ask a couple of quick follow-ups then, and I'll maybe come back to Rhoda and maybe Linda. And I think it was yourself, Rhoda, you spoke about, you know, it's not always the case that what's going on in communities is sort of replicated in prisons. And, you know, I think we've heard that throughout the inquiries so far. So just on that, you know, we talk about the public health approach that we're seeking to take in Scotland with regard to substance use. So do you feel that what that means is being delivered in Scottish prisons? So we want to make our strategies and policy fit for a public health approach that meets the needs of people impacted by substance use. Is that what we're really seeing being delivered in prisons at the moment? It's maybe one more for Linda, but I'm interested to ask you, Rhoda, since you sort of brought up the issue.
So, yes, we take a harm reduction approach, the same as in the community. It's a public health approach. I think in some of the evidence I submitted, I described some of the services that exist in terms of when people have taken illicit substances, and then the follow-up work that we do around referral into the harm reduction service, and the work that we do with individuals and the purpose of that. We do a lot of work in our addiction teams within the prison healthcare as well, in terms of taking that approach, and also ensuring that people who have come into prison, who have addiction issues, are managed appropriately within the prison and get the right treatment that they require. But I think there's something unique about the supply of drugs that's coming in, and my colleagues from SPS are in a far better position to talk about that side of things than I am. But there's something unique in my experience about what's coming in and the behaviours in terms of what happens within the prison setting, and the nature of a confined space like a prison. It presents different challenges to what goes on in the community, and also our sense of responsibility to respond. Both the officers in SPS and our staff within the NHS, we are required to respond to this. There's lots of illicit substance taking that goes on in the community, and we don't know about it. You know, there's not a health professional in everybody's house saying, please don't do that. So the confines of a prison setting and the nature of it means, I think, it presents a different challenge that I'm not sure that just a public health approach in and of itself is adequate to try and address some of the challenges that we face.
That's helpful. Linda?
To build on what Rhoda was saying, which I completely agree with, the strategy we have that Susie spoke through, it is a public health rights-based approach. That's what we want to do, to care for people with our partners, to be looking at harm reduction and a recovery model and the support that we can build around that. I think, as Rhoda points out, the other angle that we have to look at within the prison service is that prevention route for coming in, particularly around illicit substances. And I know you've had evidence on this. You've seen some of the damage that drones can do. As Rhoda said, when a substance can come in, it can go a long way within a prison very quickly. And so we have to work in close partnership with our police colleagues and with other justice agencies around that prevention angle, which, as Rhoda spoke to, I imagine is different from where we are as a community model, but certainly one of the challenges that we have within the prison service.
Okay, thank you. Katie Clark, is it on this that you're interested in coming
It's
in?
on one of the further
Okay,
issues.
thank you. I'll maybe bring in Rona Mackay in that case if you've got a follow-up question.
Thank
and
you.
then I'll bring in Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Convener, and morning panel. Just on that issue of being a public health issue, families have reported that visits, including some children's visits, have been cancelled as a punishment for substance use in prison rather than just somebody being under the influence of substances. So is that something that you recognise, and is that something that you know is happening? Because that would seem to be at odds with certain ways that we're looking at this.
I'll perhaps ask the colleagues, Sarah, to pick up on that, because I can understand why it's felt like a punishment to people. So I'll ask Sarah to talk a bit through about what the policy is and how it interplays.
So it's not something we would recognise within our family strategy. We also have a lot of supports around visits. We have our own family contact officers who do good work with families. The family visitor centres also engage with people, and actually family visitor centre engagement, it doesn't necessarily come up as the biggest theme is usually medication and regime within their contacts. But again, I need to follow up. I think that they're just publishing some of their results at the moment of what's happening within visitor centres in terms of the issues that are arising. I think, as Linda noted, I think any operational response at times will feel like a punishment to families, and if there is an operational response where we do have to manage somebody, for example, on closed visits for a period of time, or there's suspicion of drugs being introduced in that way, you will have heard from previous witnesses at this panel that the introduction of drugs can be in numerous ways. One of those has been our visits and will continue to be a consideration for us in terms of our security response. It's not an easy answer.
I understand that totally, but I think in this instance, it does seem like a punishment for substance use within the prison. It's not being punished for bringing drugs in or anything. And I think that then does seem quite punitive if that's happening, and that's really why I'm asking you if you're aware of it happening.
I would think in terms of our policy for when somebody we suspect is under the influence and they'll be put onto observations, it would be the case that for their safety and for the safety of those around them, that we would not always be allowing visits at that point. So I can understand from a family's point of view how that feels to them.
And that would be communicated properly to the family about why they were not being allowed to visit.
It should be communicated properly, and if there are instances where it's not, we would look to engage with families and address their complaints, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you very much. I'll bring in Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. Linda Pollock, I'll come to you first. The committee has heard, and you'll be familiar with the session last week, and the committee's heard that overcrowding is perhaps the single biggest influence on prison officers' ability to effectively manage substance misuse in prisons, due obviously to capacity and resource management. Now, despite the early releases that we've seen over the last, let's say, 12 months, the prison population is now at its highest weekly level since April 2014. I think it's about 8,350, give or take. How does the SPS plan to manage and address that overcrowding, and both in the short and the long term, but also how will those plans to manage the overcrowding impact on the SPS's ability to manage and prevent substance abuse within your system?
Thank you. And, you're 8,395 today, so you're bang on correct with your figures. It is a significant concern for us around the numbers that we have within our estate across Scotland just now, and we will take every opportunity to raise that. We are working very closely with not just our Scottish Government colleagues, but all of the justice partners to understand the system, what is happening, particularly with court backlogs, particularly with the increase of long-term sentences, and what is happening around that, and what can we do as an operational service to respond to that. The committee will be very aware and will understand that we are limited in terms of what we can do. We receive the people that the courts sent us, and what we can do with that. We have taken a number of actions, as you're aware of, with regards to how we use our estate to try and maximise the space that we have within there. You'll be very aware that within HMP Pullmont that we now have short-term men within there as well, which was a step that we've taken. We've been able to open up more space in Grampian. It is very sad that we are sitting today with over 1,400 men in Barlinnie. It is sitting at 140% capacity. So we are very concerned about the overcrowding and the impact that has on us, and what our operational levers are that we can respond to that. I know that when our Chief Executive met with you up in Grampian, we were talking about the introduction of a focus day as one of the things that we could do to try and provide stability to the organisation. And this is a change to what the regime and roster would be to try and maximise the amount of hours throughout the working day for people within custody. We sought to bring that forward as a national project, and I know that the Prison Officers Association were here last week speaking to that. In looking to do that as a national project, we heard very clearly from our trade union partners in the Prison Officers Association that this should be done at a local level, that bringing this in as a national project was unhelpful for that level of oversight, and that due to the local nature of prisons and the local partnerships, that this was something that would be better to tackle at a local level. So we have changed what we are focusing on. We're looking now at regime and roster review that will be undertaken at each establishment working with their trade union partners, working with their NHS colleagues and other third sector partners, will be looking at what we can do to maximise that time during the day. So looking at how we change rosters for our staff, to have more staff on during the day, to be able to provide importantly, more time out of cells for people, because we know that where we are just now is not good for anybody. We know that due to the numbers we have, we are having to regularly change regimes, and that does not give stability to the people within our care and nor to our staff, and that builds up frustration. And what we want to do in order to provide more stability across the estate is to look at how we maximise that time working in partnership so that we can offer a regular offer to people in our care, so they know every day what they are getting, and as do our staff, they know what they are turning up to do on a daily basis. So this will now be taken forward with each plan. There'll still be national support for that. Our headquarters team are there to support and to have national parameters with that. I know from speaking, for example, to the Chief Inspector who I've met with, and with Nancy Laux from Families Outside, the concerns people will have, and how do we address those? How do we maximise and make sure that we still have family contact time? We have, yourselves, you'll have seen this when you were up in Grampian, and recently Dumfries have also moved to this model, and they've been able to report improved family access time. They've also been able to note improved, or rather a decrease in sick absence, so improved staff attendance, which is also helpful from this point of view. Importantly, it will still stick to the 35-hour working week, which we introduced last year. But that is one of the things, I would say probably one of the few things within our operational ability that we can do to try and make things safer for people, and to work within the constraints as what we have. On the longer term, we are working with government and with partners to try and look at what the longer term model could be. We also work very closely with our colleagues in HMPPS in England and Wales. We are not alone in this situation. They are in a very similar situation to us, and we regularly compare what they are doing and what we are doing to see if there's anything else that we could be doing. We are pleased that there is a review into sentencing and penal policy, and look forward to hearing what that will say. We have a concern around the number of remands, as you will know, within the Scottish system, and why that sits so stubbornly high, and the use of short-term sentences. And we know that a lot of the growth has been in the use of long-term sentences as well, where we are seeing that drive. And alongside that, the needs that people have coming into care in our care when they're in prison for such long sentences. We are, I will stop, I promise. But we are really pleased for the support from Scottish Government to be able to build both in Highland and in Glasgow. You'll have seen the facilities that we have. The conditions that we are holding men in Barlinnie just now is shameful, and it is important that we do, and we are grateful for the support to be able to build better facilities. They will give more space, although limited more space, but importantly they will give more humane conditions for the people within our care. But this is a very difficult long-term problem that Scotland is experiencing, and I would also say that it's in England and Wales and other countries across Western Europe as well, particularly as we look at court backlogs and the rise of longer-term sentences.
I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for the very full answer. I'll interrogate that just very slightly, if I may. You mentioned in there about remand prisoners. again, off the top of my head, I think about 1,800 of your, say, 8,300 are remand. As at this moment, you'll give me the exact figure. Presumably they present a specific issue in terms of the overcrowding and the management thereof. So would you mind just detailing that?
Yes, I'm not going to give you an exact number, but I will say it's around 27%. So again, we're there. I think always what is slightly concerning though is that the number for women is always higher, which is concerning around that. You're correct that it does present different challenges in overcrowding with regards to when we have people on remand. It is not uncommon for us now to have people on remand for up to 2 years whilst they await their sentence. The access to services is something that we challenge with. It's challenging for people on remand, but also the consistency of knowing when people are going to be with us and for how long and when they may be liberated creates a whole additional challenge in terms of trying to organise a regime and support for the people within our care, and adds a level of it's an element which we don't know what's going to happen next, so it makes it very hard to work with people to be able to plan appropriately for them and also for ourselves in terms of services of how we can support them best.
Yeah. I think, Rhoda, you were wanting to maybe just come in, if you don't mind, and then...
The matter of overcrowding, I just wanted to use the opportunity to say that in terms of the impact overcrowding has on NHS services is not inconsiderable. It is considerable, I have to say. In terms of our ability, we can't flex our service to move up and down in terms of numbers as they move up and down. So our service is static in terms of our establishment of staff. So when we are in a position, when we are facing a situation rather where we've got overcrowding, that makes the delivery of NHS clinical care really challenging, or more challenging than it is ordinarily. And if you combine that then with situations that can arise around substance misuse, the impact again is significant in terms of our ability to deliver routine general care on a day-to-day basis. I think overcrowding has an impact. I'm sure committee have heard already about the impact on people's mental health, but it is a vicious cycle. And I just wanted to highlight that it is a significant challenge for our ability to deliver good, high-quality, consistent health care. I don't know if Leona wants to say a bit more about that, but I thought I'd use that opportunity.
To back up what Rhoda's saying as well, I mean, I don't think and I don't believe that overcrowding has been the biggest influence around substance misuse, because substance misuse has always been there throughout prison history. And when various focus groups have been done, prisoners have always said it's about the boredom and the lack of purposeful activity, about sitting in their cells locked up for long times. And then also for, as Rhoda said as well, because of I've got psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors waiting around because we haven't got the same access to prisoners for them to come to us in the health centre to be seen. So that gets curtailed within the daily routine. But again, I feel that substance misuse has always been there, but we're always contending with more. Overcrowding has helped greatly for more access to drugs. And as we touched on before, even the type of drugs that are coming through, there's more psychosis, there's more safety issues for the prisoners and for the staff. And I was thinking about when you're saying about family visits being cancelled, the only ones that I know of that have been cancelled is when the drug psychosis has been so off the scale that they've been a danger to themselves and they wouldn't be in a fit state to be taken up to the visits. But it was really just to say about boredom and lack of jobs and things to do.
No, that's really helpful and reflective of other evidence that we've heard throughout this inquiry. Sarah Angus, similar sort of point. The committee's heard about a lot of work, good work that's been done by the SPS to address the supply of substances into the estate. But obviously, the SPS and other agencies also are looking to address the demand and the reasons underlying that demand. You're in a somewhat challenging funding environment. So how does the SPS balance that spending between addressing the supply issue whilst at the same time trying to address a demand issue?
I'm probably going to bring my colleague Linda in terms
Sure.
of some of the financial aspects of that. In terms of, you talk about a challenging environment, and we've just heard from NHS colleagues that they are also challenged, particularly in light of the high population that we're experiencing. And I'm sure the same would be said by some of our third sector partners in terms of what services you can offer. It is a core purpose of the Scottish Prison Service to address and look to address rehabilitation, look to impact on recidivism, and so as a job we expect to be able to do that. Now yes, that becomes more limited in times of high population, but there is also good work that both we ourselves do and our partners do. So in terms of the balancing of that money, it would be seen as part of our operational function. We facilitate groups. Susie might come in on this as well, in terms of things around alcohol awareness, programmes that look at substance misuse. Some of those are directly related to offending behaviour. Some of those are in a more supportive way in terms of addictions. We work with third sector partners to facilitate recovery cafes amongst quite a number of our establishments. We have had a long-standing relationship with Alcoholics Anonymous and facilitate sessions for them. I would say our chaplains are also excellent in terms of pastoral care and support to people. And clearly when we then talk about people's overall case management and the well-being, we're not just talking about the assessment. There's a lot of time spent assessing people at times through the courts, through the system, through to parole, and it's a real focus of us to ensure that it's not just assessment, but it's also relationships and intervention, because the assessment will, of course, never change should you not be able to get to the actual doing of anything. So it talks to my earlier point about policies, making sure that they're talking to each other. We have quite a significant bit of work underway in terms of pathways. Now, the committee will probably know the term case management and integrated case management within prisons, and that's looking at our convicted population in terms of what their needs are. There is a focus on needs in terms of risk reduction and movement through to progression and hopefully testing depending on your sentence. But what we want to do is ensure that there's one plan in place around somebody, so that it's not just a focus on reducing reoffending, but it also really embodies the health needs and the well-being aspects. And then what you would look at is what are the activities that we have. So we talked about boredom, and that's certainly been a feature of the feedback from all people, including individuals themselves. It's one of the reasons why when we're looking at designs in our new prisons, that actually the focus is on how can we maximise opportunities, how can we continue to and develop how we run prisons in a way that offers us the biggest opportunity. Now, all of those things are difficult with a high population, but we can't be sitting under that in terms of our ongoing plans. So yes, we realise things are challenging because of the population. However, we have to continue to move forward in terms of our planning and development as an organisation, alongside the plans, I suppose, for trying to address the population. Linda, I don't know if you want to say anything.
I'd say that the short answer is I think every public body would always say if we had more, we could do more. With regards to resourcing, I do think with the settlement that we have been able to do a lot around the prevention angle. I know that you'll have seen yourself some of the body scanners that we have, the equipment that we now have to try and be able to identify and stop substances coming in. I know that you saw the window grills that we've put up in Edinburgh, which is something we're looking to move out as well. So there are various things that we have been able to do, and I'd want to comment as well the very close working relationship we have with Police Scotland around prevention as well, and the support that they have there, so where we can work in partnership to try and stop and prevent substances from coming into prisons, and then what we do once we have identified them there and responding to that.
Very grateful. Convener.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in Kitty Clark and then Sharon Dowie.
Thank you very much. And as a committee, we have met with small groups of former prisoners in private to discuss their experiences of drugs within prisons. And one of the people that we met told us originally he'd been expected to serve a 9-year sentence, but in reality served 27 years in prison due to drugs issues and drugs use. So is that a scenario that you recognise? And could you maybe tell us a bit more about how possession of drugs is dealt with in the prison system? And maybe Linda might be best to come in on this.
Yeah, I'll ask my colleagues to come in to support with that, because that feels a really sad case to hear that. I'm not sure that it is one that I would recognise as a regular example of that level of sentence increase over that period. I'm going to look to Sarah and Susie if they want to say more on.
Yeah. That would, in my practical experience working within prisons, that isn't something I would necessarily see or hear as routine. However, the cycle of offending and re-offending, we will all, as practitioners, see people that will come back to prison. I think one of your earlier witnesses noted about almost the criminalisation of drugs and how drug use and linked to offending can really have a big impact on people's lives. And we're acutely aware of that. So,
without focusing on that specific example, because that may be an extreme example, but could you maybe just give us a bit more information about how possession of drugs is dealt with in the prisons, and in terms of it may have all sorts of consequences, and length of sentence is one of those.
Possession of drugs is reported to the police.
Yes, okay. So it's treated as a criminal matter. I understand. Okay. So, we've also heard a lot of evidence about the inconsistency of practice within prisons, in particular inconsistency of provision in terms of medication recovery and other support services. And the Scottish Recovery Consortium have said that there should be a minimum set of standards across prisons. I wondered what your response was to that.
So I think to set the context, we've got prisons across the whole of Scotland with different services available in each area. So we wouldn't have uniformity in terms of the types of services necessarily. It's more about, we have different NHS boards we're working with who've got their own challenges and their own structures around how they deliver care. What I would say is that we work very closely with our colleagues to try and ensure that we've got core consistent principles across all areas that allow for access to recovery interventions. My colleagues can talk more about the medical and the clinical aspects of that, but we work really hard to look at how we ensure that there are access to the same types of intervention, even if it's delivered by different services, because in different areas there would be different services. The more remote areas won't have some of your national organisations in the same way, but we do work specifically with the Scottish Recovery Consortium. They are engaged in the work that we are doing around understanding recovery from within and our training of officers within that. And all of that is around trying to ensure a consistent understanding and awareness of the complexity of supporting someone for whom their drug use is a key issue or their alcohol use is a key issue. So we are looking to have the same messages delivered, the same communication go out, but we do need to work with all our partners to make sure that we're able to cover those key principles about what good recovery looks like or good access to service looks like. But our colleagues can talk more about the clinical aspect and the consistency around delivery of medication, which I hear that you mentioned earlier in your question.
Okay. So, if people are using substances in prison, it can have a direct impact on their medication regime. And for safety reasons, we have to review that. And that's usually within GGC, that's a GP that does that. And that can be over a period of days, depending how long this episode of drug use continues for. So we closely monitor people who are using drugs. We want, obviously, people to be back on their own medication regime as quickly as possible, but we have to they have to balance that with risk. And that usually means that people end up being put on supervised medication. And people don't like that, and I can understand that, but we can't then just ignore the fact that they've taken an illicit substance and we don't know what that might do to them if they were to continue their medication unsupervised. Our ethos would always be to get people back to managing as much as they can themselves. They're adults and they should be doing that. But we have to balance risks, I suppose. We would work closely with people who are known to our addiction service. They continue to get support with that. If people are being worked with the mental health team in the prison, that continues. We have a small health improvement team, I think I mentioned earlier, that deliver harm reduction processes, services. So, and we have high referral rates, numbers into that. And often these high numbers are, it's people who are referred certainly more than once. They're repeat referrals into the system because people get referred in, we do a piece of work with them, there's then another incident, another episode, and then it goes on, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of work and activity goes into actually supporting people who are taking and misusing illicit substances in the prison. And you know, we strive to try and support them to come off that and to change that behaviour.
I think for substance misuse, it's such a complex area, and I think with the amount of inconsistencies we've got from when they come from the community to go into court, could we start using DTTOs and other methods to prevent them coming to prison? But it's that transition of care. So how do we make sure that what they've come from in community, and okay, they might start drugs in prison because it's around, it can be about boredom, it can be around bringing in drugs as a way of payback. But it's making sure that we've got that transition of care coming into us as well as going back out to whatever service we're going to transfer them. And as we've touched on with all the different health boards, like we're very good at prescribing Buvidal in Forth Valley, but there's a lot of communities out there that can't prescribe Buvidal. And it's about trying to get that minimum set of standards, that consistency, looking at the whole patient pathway from beginning to end. And even if they are a revolving door, if they carry on getting intoxicated more than once or twice or more episodes within prison, making sure that we're picking them up and tailoring that package of care for each individual. But I think it's making sure that we've got access to them, enough time, and it is all around that consistency and working together where NHS can't do it themselves, prison can't do it themselves, but I think we all have to try and decide what is the best package of care and what different element each partner can do. So could SPS do low level and then NHS come in and do more specialised, or what kind of resource do we need? And like we have resource that's sitting there but might not be getting utilised. It's not all about give us extra money, although that would be helpful, but it's about are we using that resource to the best for our patient care and our staff care.
Yes, and you've made the point about access and organisation really more than once in your evidence today. And we've also heard a lot of evidence about the lack of continuity of care and the inconsistencies throughout the system in relation to through care and release. And we've heard many examples, good examples of very good practice in some prisons, but it's clearly not uniform, and there's some very, very bad examples as well. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about how you think good practice can be shared across the estate, but maybe also picking up from some of the points that have already been made about whether the problem is resource or whether, a lack of resource, or whether the problem is a cultural one, or that we're just not organising ourselves well enough to make sure that we're able to deliver, for example, the through care and release planning that's needed. Because as we know, the evidence shows that the more there is planning for release, the more successful that release is and the less reoffending that we have. I don't know who would like to come in on that. Sarah?
I'm happy to start. I'm sure other people will want to come in. I think consistency. So, to take the first point, so the alcohol and drugs can't speak this morning. The alcohol and drugs strategy in and of itself is about getting that framework of consistency. But I think talking to the first question in terms of operational implementation of that, how does that work in practice? And we do want a broad level of consistency, but we also have to recognise that there are very different communities in Scotland, and our prisons cover the whole of Scotland. So at times there will be inconsistencies because it matches the needs of that prison. And that is about working both as an organisation to understand where our differences lie, be that population or location, and working with our health colleagues to understand what their assessment is of needs. So I do agree with consistency of standards. I think it's very important, but caveating that slightly by the fact that there will be geographical differences. So I think, Susie, do you want to come into... Sorry.
So is the problem a lack of resource, or is it a cultural problem or an organisational problem, the fact that we've got such inconsistency of practice? I don't know if Susie's got a view on that.
In terms of through care
it's not just through care. It's I mean, I've raised both the experience of prisoners actually while they're serving their sentences and also as they're coming to release. So it's the inconsistencies of approach seem to be throughout the estate in terms of these issues. Is that fair?
I think we can say yes, there are inconsistencies. I think we've got some really good evidence of good practice, though, that we should be building on and that we strive to build on. So where we've got examples of the work that you've seen in HMP Grampian, for example, is how do we share the principles of that learning with the other establishments, and what does that look like? And so different boards and different establishments may work that through in a different way, but there are certainly lots of really positive examples that we should be celebrating and making more evident, I think. And I think there's still work to do on that. We do share a lot. We do talk through our governors in charge, have regular meetings where they talk about the practice in their area, and they talk about the services that they've got and the partnerships that they've got to try and build that knowledge and background. We've also got a suite of support and recovery workers now across the estate whose job is to come together and share best practice from their perspective, and they do have a forum themselves where they talk about what's happening in one area to another and how do they share information. But we can always do more and always strive to try and build on that practice. It's critical that we get the through care element right, and the work that we've been doing more recently around ensuring that we're engaged with Upside, that we've got our third sector organisations in, that we're engaging with our NHS colleagues so that there's not a break in their treatment, so that prescribing can be managed. It's always overcomplicated when we've got so many people, though, and managing people from, so they might be sat in Forth Valley, for example, but their home area might not be. It might be in Highland, or they may be in Borders, and therefore how do you make sure that you coordinate with the community services that are not your local services from your board area? So there is a lot of good partnership working that we do around that, and making sure that those discussions are in place before somebody's out. And we also, as both organisations, work the National Prison Care Network in terms of pulling together best practice, looking at where there are opportunities to build shared policy and shared development of how we should be practising going forward. So there's a number of areas, I would say.
Thank you.
Very much. OK, I'm going to bring in Sharon Dowie and then Pauline McNeill.
Thank you. Good morning. You mentioned earlier on about preventative measures in stopping drugs getting into prison in the first place. But we've also heard that prison staff are increasingly being targeted to bring substances into prison. We're aware there are professional boundaries training in place, but how serious a problem is corruption, and does more need to be done to address it?
Thank you. I think corruption is an issue in a number of organisations. It's something that we take very seriously and work with our partners on it. I would say that the number of staff that are corrupted are very small within that, but that does not mean that it's not a serious problem and one that we take very, very seriously. As you mentioned, all staff do go through training in our anti-corruption policy. We work closely. We have with regards to our intelligence, we work very closely across establishments of sharing that. And I know that you had last week Jim Smith, who's head of our public protection unit here, who sits on a national basis to oversee all of that, working again closely with Police Scotland within that. So we take a number of steps around that, and likewise we've been working with the HMPPS in England and Wales to understand where they are as well, and what more we can do. So we will always be looking to see what more we can do around staff corruption, where we do know that our staff don't want drugs entering prisons. It makes everyone's life more difficult, and they are very good at speaking up from where they are aware of or have concerns around that as well. We have searching, as you know, that takes place. We have a national searching unit, including with dogs as well. So there are a number of avenues where we are able to search, to prevent and to be able to identify where we believe there could be corruption, and then work with the police and other agencies about tackling that.
Support there for them if they are targeted? Because I would imagine it would be quite a scary thing.
I know from some experiences where it has happened, they have been able to speak and to be able to be supported in that way. I do think that the threats that we have, and I know our colleagues at the Prison Officers Association spoke to this, the threats are greater just now than where we have been before with serious organised crime. We're taking that very seriously with our partners as well. I know they spoke last week of the role of the Serious Organised Crime Task Force, which both the Cabinet Secretary and the Lord Advocate co-chair with partner agencies around that. We are continuing to speak to staff and continuing to raise with them so they know what the avenues are that are there, that we are vigilant around it, and to make sure that there are support locally for people as well. So if they had concerns or were worried about things, that there should be support there, but also being very clear about how they can raise issues or concerns.
Okay. And the call for views, Glasgow City ADP suggested searches of prison staff should be carried out by someone external rather than being searched by their own colleagues. Have you got thoughts on that?
I saw that, and I'm not sure I quite understood the premise behind that. I think our staff are trained in how to do searching. We have a number of mechanisms within there. We have the National Search Unit with dogs. So I saw that and I was interested in that and I suppose would be keen to try and understand why they think that would be an appropriate and the right skill base to do that. I think we are working very hard to ensure that we do searching in a way with all of the resources and options that we have there to be able to stop drugs from entering.
In the estate, I know it was something that was used in HIP or in Kilmarnock before it got brought back into
and the dogs
service,
got to stay in so we do within the National Tactical Searching Unit, we do have drug dogs within there to work as that specialised team that is used across the country at a national basis. So we do keep all of these options under review in terms of the requirement that is there. So I will check with them whether they think that it's not something that's been raised with me about requiring the fact that we require more dogs at the moment.
Okay, and just one final one. It was something that came up last week, was in trying to stop whether it be weapons or drugs moving across the estate, was searches within the prison. And there was an issue that was raised about staff searches being completed because it had to be somebody of the same sex. And I'd asked the question about a wand, because I know that I go through like airport security and it could be somebody of the opposite sex that does it because they don't actually touch it, it's just a wand. Can I ask, if it's policy, are you looking at it, and what problems that actually raises in the prison estate?
So searches do need to be by the same sex, and that would include, but if you were using a wand, we do move staff around regularly to ensure that we have the right staffing complement to be able to do that. We work at a national level with all of our establishments to make sure, and that is part of your planning on a daily basis around your staffing complement, about ensuring that you have the right mix of people to be able to undertake all of the duties that are required. So we are confident that we can move people around. We are, I saw some of the comments. We are very proud that we are, as an organisation, have more women working for us. So we are, I don't see it as an issue just now, and that's not what has been raised with us as an issue. So
I think it's great that you've got more females coming in, but it could obviously hinder you in the job, and we've obviously heard about the overcrowding. So if you're trying to prevent items getting moved across the estate and female officers can't actually go in and do their job, I'm just wondering, are you looking at that policy? What's the reason behind it? Because you're not actually putting physical hands on. I'm just wondering, we've got, going on to a different subject, we've got male-bodied prisoners that are in a female estate. So I'm just wondering why we can't have female officers doing just a check where they don't actually touch the prisoner.
So the prison rules would say that using the wand would be an extension of the arm. I know you've been through all of this in the previous session. We are not seeing this as presenting as an operational issue just now in terms of deployment of our staff. As always, we would keep all of these things under consideration. If we are speaking to our senior managements across establishments and they were to say this was becoming, there was an issue around deployment that they couldn't get, then of course we would look into that. It's not, I did see and hear the evidence that was presented, and it's not something that has been represented from across our establishments from governors there.
Right, so it's not an issue from your point of view, and we're not looking at the policy.
We keep all policies under review, so if we needed to change it, then that, of course, particularly for prison rules, they are in legislation. There's a process that you would need to go through to change that. But that is, of course, possible to do so with evidence and a proposal that is there. So if that were the case, then we wouldn't say no to anything if it was presented as a need and we had the evidence and we would work through that. So it's not a no, we're not doing it. It's not been raised with us as an issue. And if it were, then of course we would want to consider that.
Okay, right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just before I bring in Pauline McNeill, we've got a slight issue with some windows opening today. I think they've got a mind of their own. So we're just arranging to get them closed, but it might be a little bit noisy while we're doing it. So it's just to so that you know. Oh, there we go. Okay, Pauline McNeill.
Right on cue. Good morning. I just wanted to explore the issue of further of overcrowding and what leads male prisoners in particular to maybe start to take drugs where they previously had, and that's my interest in this line of questioning. When you heard me just gasping when I heard you say 1,400 male prisoners in Berlin, I mean, it's utterly shocking. I really do feel for the prison staff and the prisoners, actually, operating in that environment. Could I ask Linda Pollock, first of all, why is Berlin the prison where you put everybody then? Is there a reason why this prison is so overcrowded? Because it must be impacting on the well-being of the male prisoners and leading to taking drugs, surely.
I will bring in my colleague Sarah as well, who has operational experience of working in Berlin. I know that you saw the media articles that we had last week, and there was a focus particularly on Berlin. It is the prison that is able to flex the most. So when other prisons reach their capacity or are unable to, people will be diverted to there because of the ability of doubling up within the cells there. So it is the prison, because of its location and where it is, and the flex that is there, that it is more will go there than it would do within other prisons.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's always been a historical purpose of Berlin. It has offered flex. It previously offered more flex than what it will do now, and that is because our population is more complex in terms of mix. I think we've mentioned serious and organised crime, the ability to manage those groups. I know you had evidence to that purpose in previous sessions, makes it more difficult, and so it is now harder for Berlin to maybe flex as much as it previously used to. They have a really strong...
Clearly not. I mean, you get 1,400 prisoners there. There was 1,300 last time I looked at the figures.
We do.
So do you see, you're 100 more prisoners, so you must be...
I think one of the issues always will be the courts. Glasgow is one of the busiest courts, so the admissions within Berlin can jump significantly. Having worked there, and Rhoda and her staff will also testify to this, that a Monday night can see a really significant jump. That is a real concern. It is clearly one of the fundamental aspects of the case for HMP Glasgow, because it's unsustainable.
I hope we don't end up in the same position, that just one prison just being overloaded in that way. In view of that, I mean, is there any extra resource put in to try to... I would like to ask from the prisoner's point of view. I mean, God help the prisoners who are serving their sentence in those conditions compared to those who might be in slightly better conditions in the prison estate. So does that get taken into account when you're managing the jail?
What we do at a national level is looking across the whole prison estate. So every morning we have the numbers for every prison. We have a national team that looks at movements across the prison's estate. So they have a range of risk indicators that they look at for each establishment. So we are sitting here today, and I know this was in the articles that came out last week, with 10 of our prisons at red capacity. So that means that 10 of our prisons, and it's all of our major large prisons, are struggling for space and for staffing and for access of services. We have Inverness is also likewise sitting at, I I think it's about 130% where they are against their design capacity. So we do regularly at a national level look to move people to try and get that balance across the state so that it is being managed in the best possible way in the conditions that we're under just now. But we absolutely accept that this is not the best conditions for people within our care or for our staff to be have.
But I know that I know you share my concerns, and you know you're not making the decisions. I do appreciate that, but what I'm trying to understand is what are you doing to compensate the experience of those prisoners trying to stop going on drugs or getting off drugs or looking after themselves while they're serving their sentence. That's kind of what I'm really interested in.
We have been trying to flex within our resources about it being able to, where we can put additional staff within halls and support to be able to offer that. That is going back to earlier comments of when we were looking at the regime and roster across establishments so that we can try and open up more during the day to have more staff available to be able to provide more services during that day to support people, because we recognise that with these numbers that the service people are receiving has been diminished, and how can we then try and address that from an operational point of view for those very reasons.
Thank you. Can I ask Leona Padgett, in answer to questions, you did talk about the psychiatrists, psychologists that you work with, and I took from that that maybe there was a struggle to get prisoners out to get their health treatment, or is that what you were meaning?
Yeah, because of the routine throughout the day. So I can have consultants and nurses waiting to see prisoners, but because the day is so busy and the amount of SPS staff themselves are slightly reduced, well, definitely reduced just now with the overcrowding because they've got pools and other things, that they're not being brought forward to the health centre. So for my resources, I try and put them up to the hall so they can see prisoners and have more access, but it is all about access. And then you come to the weekends, it's an 8 to 5 shift. I'd much rather it was a 7-day service, Monday to Sunday. But it's an 8 to 5 shift, so when you've got your core duties that you're having to get out, such as medications, you're dealing with all the emergencies, you're trying to deal with the mental health triage. For my teams in Forth Valley, mental health and substance misuse is an integrated team. So none of those problems ever go away, but trying to actually get direct access, that has reduced significantly, I would say, with the overcrowding. And I've got 3. I've got Stirling, Glenorchy and Pullman. So it's the same. Maybe not so bad in Stirling because of smaller numbers, but it is about access.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have public money sitting around. It's one of the resources that I could definitely use more efficiently, because you've got public money sitting around doing nothing, basically. Shouldn't really say that.
Are you able to comment at all on what impact that has on the prisoner who can't get their appointment?
Well, we've always got, it ends up making the waiting list longer, where we're still up against targets that we're trying to push towards. But every prisoner that comes into our admitting prisons has to be seen the next day if they've got substance misuse issues, for bloodborne virus. They're all opt-out services. So it's trying to make sure that we're reducing the risk as much as we can to make sure nobody's missed out. It's the same if we coming across the same prisoner who ends up in Moors on the drug observations. If it's happening 2 or 3 times, why? So we put in more resource. So it's about trying to flex our services as much as we possibly can. So I end up downgrading some services to increase other services. So again, like I said before, I would like to have that consistency in that resource and the best use of time. But SPS have priorities, I have priorities for my teams, and it's just about trying to find a way forward where we can make sure that all the resource is used as efficiently as possible. And it is about access.
You said there that prisoners with substance misuse they must be seen the next day. Did you say that?
If they're in admission. So there's a checklist on admission, and we're very good at admission. We have very good processes.
I thought earlier you were suggesting, as other prisoners who are not getting their appointments because...
It's just as they're going through their pathway. So if they've been in for a while, take Glenorchy for example. 90 prisoners will go through that health centre every day, and there's 750 prisoners in Glenorchy. So there's always more referrals coming through day in, day out, And if you are only getting to access, like my GP can access a prisoner from 9:30 till 11 o'clock, so that's 2 hours. Then from 11 o'clock to 1:30, there's nothing. Then from 1:30 to 4 o'clock is access. If we could use that time more efficiently, we'd get through, like my staff are there, they can carry on seeing prisoners, but if we can't get the prisoners to the health centre or I can't get access up in the halls, that's a downtime.
Is affecting...
Yes, because the prison staff are having to do other things.
Thank you. Rhoda, do you want to?
Yeah, I would concur with what Lorna said. And some of that is out with control of SPS as well, because things happen in prisons and they get locked down. So there's unexpected events happen that then impact on our ability to deliver healthcare, and we have to accept that. Mm-hmm. We have regular discussions in GGC with our prison governors around making sure that we try and maximise the resource. And there is no doubt that that is a challenge. So we can sit, for example, oral health for us, dentistry is a particular issue where we can have a dentist coming in and the patients aren't getting seen. And that's not necessarily to do with substance abuse, and that's what's been discussed this morning. It's to do with the way the system works, and it impacts then on our ability to deliver healthcare. Routine stuff is the stuff that goes first, but it's also what people require and what they need. So yes, there is a very good admissions process when somebody comes in. We have a clear process which nursing staff go through, and people are seen by the GP the next day. But when it comes to illicit substances, I think I mentioned earlier, that's where these people have to be seen. If they're on medication, then that kicks back other routine or other appointments for other people. So you're constantly, on a daily basis, re-evaluating what clinical provision we can provide in every prison. That's not just unique to, I would imagine that's happening across the country. It's not unique to the prisons that we deliver services in.
Thank you. Just lastly, I was interested in prisoners who are not currently on drugs but might just be struggling with not getting their health appointments, living or serving in overcrowded conditions. In your opinion, do you think this is adding to the problem of drug use within prisons or not?
I don't know if we could just conclude that.
Right.
I think we can't ignore any factor here. You asked a question earlier about 3 variables, and my thoughts were all 3 actually matter. So you can't rule anything out, but I wouldn't want to conclude that that's increasing drug use. I think it increases complaints and frustration, and people get angry about the fact that they wanted to see somebody and they've not managed to get their appointment. We've got bigger challenges, actually, in some respects, with getting people out to hospital for secondary care appointments. That's another challenge for us, again, separate from this discussion. So I wouldn't draw that conclusion, but we can't rule anything out here because it's complex. It's a really complex environment that we're trying to deliver services in. And I think there are cultural challenges that both organisations have. I think Susie mentioned, the SPS have to engage with a variety of health boards. We all have a bit of a different way. There'll be differences, slight differences in how Leona's team and the teams that I manage go about the day-to-day work. And we have to flex as well to make sure, because we're in different prison environments with different sizes, different numbers. So how we deliver services changes, and the population, whether it's a women's prison or whether it's actually a male prison, there are different services that we would provide. I think SPS have real important priorities, which are about security and control and maintaining good order, because you can't deliver. If you're not maintaining good order, then it's really impossible for us as an NHS to be delivering services. But there are challenges in that, because our agendas and our priorities are different. So, we do work closely with SPS colleagues to try and overcome these, but they're not insignificant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think William Kerr, you maybe wanted to bring in a follow-up, and then I'll bring in Ben McPherson.
Thank you, Linda Pollock. It's something entirely related to what Pauline McNeill was saying when she was talking about Barlinnie earlier on. Now, I've visited Barlinnie several times, and I recognise exactly what Pauline's talking about. particularly around the doubling up. Now, it seems to me that if you have, or one would theorise that if you have two people sharing a cell, the size and style of which we have in Barlinnie, the availability of substances, the pressure to use substances, the pressure to get involved in distribution of substances may well increase. But I don't know that. And so the question is there any research into the impacts, whether on substances or more widely, where you have prisoners doubling up in cells? Because if there were, or if there were any proposed, and it showed significant negative impacts, that might be quite powerful in terms of policy making going forward.
I'm looking to my colleagues to see whether there is any research within that.
I'm not aware of any direct research into the impact of doubling up. I think we have feedback through our surveys and our engagement with people that for some people actually the doubling up is a very positive impact for them, and that kind of body in the cell can be a protective factor for some individuals, but there is no research that I'm fully aware of that would give you clarity of, I guess, about the key themes or the recommendations that might come out of that. We do know that there will be a mix of experiences around that. For some it will be positive and some will be negative. And we do have some anecdotal and feedback from those with lived experience, but what we don't have is anything formal in terms of research. And that would be something that we could engage with our colleagues in HMPPS as well around some of the experiences that are happening elsewhere, as well as beyond, you know, our own jurisdictions, as to where some best practice might come out of that. The difficulty is obviously the cell type and the space available to do that.
Yeah, I was just going to add there is a difference between double cells or body cells which have appropriate space and what are designed as single cells in Barlinnie.
Rhoda McLeod.
Yeah, so in a related matter around research, you'll know, and I believe the committee had a discussion about this I think maybe last week, around vapes. There was some discussion around this. I think that it would be really worthwhile to get some research on whether there is a correlation in terms of the increase around drug misuse within the prison setting and the introduction of vapes when we introduced smoke-free prisons in 2019. It's anecdotal, you know, in terms of what we think. I think definitely within GGC, we think there is an increase in drug use in prisons, and it is related to vaping, but we can't conclude that because we don't have the hard evidence. So I think that would be a really valuable piece of research to do, and I don't think it would take that long to do it. I think some of what we experience as well in terms of our medical or clinical response to people is very influenced by the fact that people are ingesting the drugs through vapes. And Leona might want to say a bit more about that in terms of the clinical impact on and how we manage people who are under the influence because of maybe taking stuff through vaping. Yeah,
I agree. I think over the last couple of years, with the introduction of vapes, yes, it was great that we stopped smoking overnight in prisons, and we thought the roofs were going to come off and vapes came on the scene. But the amount of people that have been then put on MOS has definitely increased, and we do keep those statistics for the prison network. And the other thing I have noticed, just anecdotal, I can't say that word, and since we've changed the population in Pullman, where we always had women and we had young offenders, but since the male population, adult males have come in, the number of MOS has gone up again hugely. Like we can have 35 plus on MOS observations on a Friday and a Saturday. And what my team have been feeding back is that because there's more adult males who are more the ones that are supplying the drugs, then more of the youngsters are getting it. The youngsters are saying that it's because of boredom that they're taking it, but we've definitely seen a huge influx. But across Glen Oakland and Pullman, I don't know if this is going to help, but across Glenelg and Pullman, because of the increase of MOS and the amount of prisoners that have reacted in a way that they've needed hospital admission has gone up. And then we've had incidents where Scottish Ambulance Service is saying they can't take more than 2. And then my staff are having to deal with prisoners that are very unwell that should actually be going out to hospital. So I think it's more of a national picture, as well as how do we deal with those incidences as they're coming up, and it's Fridays, Saturdays, and it has really been ongoing since even like last Christmas, when we had a bit of ethanol, a bit of hooch, we had drugs, and even in the last couple of weeks, different types of drugs that have been noted to come in. So we've had some heroin, which we haven't seen for a long time, on top of the synthetic benzos, on top of the synthetic cannabinoids, and the whole mixture together, where we've got some meds that are going around just now that are 500 times stronger than heroin, the effect of, and our guys are being unconscious and having to be taken out to hospital. So I think vapes is huge. They're now starting to use sublingual as when they start rubbing the drugs on the gums if they haven't got the vapes, because security around vapes has been a little bit better in the last wee while. They're always 2 steps ahead of us. We'll never stop drug use, but I do think it is about a bit of overcrowding, a bit of vapes, the ease of drugs coming in, drugs on paper, drugs in clothing, whatever we try to do, you know, there's always another way coming in. But I think the vapes and research would be a good idea.
Thank you.
Ben McPherson, then Rona Mackay.
Thanks very much, Convener. It actually relates quite well to what's just been discussed. This issue has been either directly mentioned a couple of times and alluded to a number of times this morning, but I just wondered if there's anything more that you wanted to emphasise about concerns regarding the nature of substances coming into the prison system now, more synthetic, often more dangerous and potent, smaller substances. We've heard a lot about this challenge through our evidence, and I just wondered if there was anything more that you wanted to say together. And secondly, there was interesting discussion just a few moments ago about the differences in service provision, and one would expect that with the health and social care partnerships being different in different parts of the country. But one of the striking things I think we've heard through this inquiry has been that having differentiation between services in the country is actually a positive, and it's good to have that specific ability to provide certain services in certain places, both in prison and out within the community when it comes to support with substance abuse and recovery. But I just wondered, are there any gaps that are common across the country that we should be aware of? Because that was my concern as we went into this inquiry, was that, you know, the fact that there is differentiation and there isn't a consistent approach across the country. Maybe there are gaps in certain places, but any reassurance around the fact that the way things are going right now is sufficient would be welcome, or if there are areas that you think actually we should have X service across the country and it's not being delivered at the moment. Hope that makes sense. Don't know who wants to come in first. I know, Sarah, Angus, you want to come in just a moment ago, but as that.
I can certainly come on in on this, Mr McPherson. I think we've all heard a lot about the concerns regarding synthetic substances, and absolutely we should be concerned. I think it has been previously noted that historically we understood what to expect, and now we are in a position where things are much more unpredictable. And my colleagues in POA, my operational colleagues that were here at committee have all noted that what that is that's unpredictable for individuals who are taking them. Sometimes they won't know what they're taking, and that's a real concern for them and their health. And it's concern, obviously, for our staff, who it's unpredictable in terms of what they're faced with each day. And likewise, that will be the same for our NHS colleagues. So yes, it is concerning. I think I was really interested in Dr Marlin's evidence on the difference between what is within prisons and what's out with, and actually it sometimes will speak to the constant battle that when one route closes down, another route might open up. I think Dr Marlin noted the paper when it was noted about photocopying mail, and then the increase in vapes. So nothing can be seen in isolation, and certainly we can't view things within the prison setting in isolation from what's happening in our communities, because magic wand and drugs were solved across Scotland, we wouldn't be seeing the same issues, but we do have a unique operational environment, and synthetic cannabinoids are certainly a concern. I think I welcome the fact that you note that differentiation can be a positive thing. I do agree, but also I did note that having a framework of standards is very important. I think there are local issues that we can look for opportunity at a local level, but we also really have to have a keen eye at a national level around what the bigger trends are. And I think I've forgotten your third point, but if you could remind me, sorry.
You've covered that. It was how concerned are you about synthetics now and going forward, and is there anything about differentiation of services within and out with prisons that you want to emphasise as a positive, but also are there any
gaps?
Any gaps?
Sorry, I remembered. Yes. You won't be surprised to know that anything where you can't define risk, as somebody who works in the prison service, is always going to be a concern now and going forward. And I think the work with Dundee University in terms of that contract allows us as an organisation really to have a good grasp on what is happening, and actually in terms of the evidence that we provide internationally as a result. So I always am very impressed by what people, both on the ground and within our policy colleagues and within our partners, are doing in respect of that. And in terms of gaps, I think naturally there does seem to be gaps. It's why we want to have a real focus. And in terms of moving forward with our alcohol and drug strategy, I think you've had evidence to say that the alcohol interventions may be a gap, and it's why we have that as a key part of the title, so that we try and ensure that we're not missing anything. And I think I'll bring Susie in terms of her specific expertise on any examples.
I mean, I think from our perspective, it's really critical that we keep abreast as far as we can around the types of drugs that are coming in and what might be coming in the future, so that we can, as far as possible, try to prepare staff. So that's why our work with Public Health Scotland and RADAR is also critical to add on to the conversations that we have around what comes back from Dundee University, our colleagues in police, and what's happening in other jurisdictions, to try and get a sense of the route that drugs are coming, what types of drugs are coming. They might be, the experience that Forth Valley have might not have been felt in Grampian, for example, at this point. So how do we share that information and people are aware of what presentations might be and therefore what our interventions might be? We've been doing a lot of work with our ambulance colleagues as well in terms of how do we ensure that we've got better connections across all areas that allow for, because they're seeing people on the ground, they're seeing people day in, day out in the community, and also about their presentations. So their influence around what works, what doesn't work, what is also important in terms of how we share that. So we've got quite a bit of work to do in terms of gaps. I think all of us would acknowledge that there will not be 100% access to all services in all areas at all times, and that presents a gap. We are working with prison to rehab pathways and trying to encourage that route for those for whom that is the route before the and liberation. But there will never always be enough spaces. We would always want to do more. Our alcohol and drug strategy is ambitious because we recognise if we can aim for ambition, that we will actually deliver a really good service as part of that. And it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult to identify gaps because everybody has a different need. And certainly for us, within a prison setting, the presentations and the information and advice for those in our care has to vary from what we're seeing in the community. As Rhoda said earlier, we are seeing everybody who's using, but in the community we're not. So that kind of information exchange is different. And what we're seeing is the risks associated with the types of substances that come into us and the format in which they come in increase that risk. So we know that if it comes in powder format, the dosing is really difficult and therefore they're more likely to take way more than they consider. Or if the half-life, you know, the time it takes for somebody to feel the effects, if that's drawn out, then they can often take more as part of that to try and get to the effect, by which time they've overdosed, because the cumulative effect over time builds. So it's a really challenging and complex area that we're working within. I've worked in drug services for decades, and I think the problems that we've got now are way more complex than we maybe had before. We heard from colleagues in NHS, seeing heroin in its purest form coming into a prison is actually quite unusual now. It's the synthetic drugs that are way more prevalent for us and more challenging to deal with. And it's challenging for the individuals to understand what it is they're taking. They don't know what it is, they don't know the impacts it's going to have. So we're in a constant challenge or a battle to try and get ahead of the game and make sure we've got the right information out there for everybody to help support them in their recovery and in their decision making. It's a challenge that we have all the time in the conversations that we have. And our local incident management, where we've got issues, is about learning and sharing and trying to look for ways in which we can preempt and promote positive outcomes going forward. But it's a constant daily challenge and a constant challenge for our staff particularly.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to come in? Sorry,
Could I? See if the concerns are in the drugs, and because we don't really know what we're dealing with day in and day out, and because it changes. It's not, I like Susie, I've worked in addictions for decades, and when it was just heroin or diazepam, benzos, Valium, whatever you want to call them, we always had treatments that we could reduce them on. We could give them a withdrawal regime. With the drugs that are coming through the door, we don't have a withdrawal regime, let alone when they're unconscious and we're trying to get them back to being conscious. When they go to acute services, even our acute colleagues don't know what they're dealing with. We've got no way of bringing them back round, whereas with heroin or opiates, we can use naloxone. So we never, it's the bigger picture from not just knowing what that drug is and what effect it's going to have, because it affects each person differently. And as Susie said, some of our men and women are taking what they think is their normal dose. If it's a powder or if it's on paper, they'll take an inch square or a postage stamp, but in other times they're taking 5 times that amount. And it's just that effect. We never know what we're having to deal with and work with to try and even get them back to a state of health. So, I mean, we've had people that have been intubated for 5 days, 7 days, didn't think that they would be able to breathe again, and that's all because of drugs that we just don't have any idea what they've ingested or inhaled. So that's a huge concern. For gaps, I definitely think it's around Buvidal, where it's injected once a month and there's no bullying. It gives them that clear-headedness that they get on with what they deem as a normal life. And I think Buvidal across Scotland should be the same, whether it's accessible in the community and in the prison, so that we've got that transition of care. And it shouldn't just come down to local budgets, such as me and Rhoda's, where we'll have £150,000 worth of Buvidal going out every month, but it comes as a pressure to save money. Basically mental health resources, because mental health and addictions come hand in hand. So if we haven't got that community resource before they come to prison and when they're going out of prison, they come into prison, they get a really good level of service. in most cases, we're way above what they'll get out in the community. There might be a little bit too much hand-holding, and we want to promote responsibility because they have got to be adults when they go back out. But we give a really high level of service for substance misuse and mental health, and when they go out, that lack of consistency is lost again.
Thank you all. Very helpful. Thank you.
I wonder if I can just come in with a follow-up just before I bring in Rona Mackay. So you're aware that we had the Prison Officers Association in last week, and they spoke about the kind of pressures, obviously, on prison officers and staff at the moment, not least of all because of the prison population. One of the things that they spoke about, I suppose they called for, if you like, was a return to a 24/7 nursing provision into prisons, obviously just to sort of cope and support the management of, I suppose, the impact of drug misuse more fully. So I'm just interested in what your view. That would be a significant resource commitment. So I'm interested in your views on that, Rhoda. I can see your commitment.
Yes, it would be a significant resource, which my preference would be that that's focused on the daytime, not having a nurse sitting in a prison waiting for something to happen in case it does happen. I think that one individual, or you need to make it be two, because you're leaving somebody quite vulnerable, a nurse sitting, for example, on their own in Berlin, which used to happen. And we stopped doing that shift about, it was pre-COVID, maybe 2017, something like that. We took that nurse out because they did literally sit. People are locked up in their cells. They don't have access, so an NHS member of staff wouldn't be able to go in and out of cells without going through a process with the SPS colleagues if somebody was in trouble. We do have a 24-hour, or out of hours rather, GP service, which SPS have access to if they're concerned about anyone and can get telephone advice, or the doctors can come in if that's absolutely required. But most often it's telephone advice. And the activity numbers, probably, if we were to look at what's required out of hours overnight, it's probably very, very low and wouldn't merit a member of staff sitting waiting for something to happen. I can understand where the question is coming from, because it would give that extra layer of security, but probably from a best value point of view, I'm not sure that would be something that we would be wanting to support.
Okay.
I think we have to decide what model of care do you want NHS colleagues to provide within the prison healthcare, within the prison regime, and what model of care do you want SPS colleagues to provide? Because I agree with Rhoda, we would be far better having a 7-day service where it's the same hours, Monday to Sunday, because mental health and substance misuse doesn't stop. But overnight, it would be a waste of resource. And are we treating them as this is their place of residency for a prisoner? Because we're supposed to still be promoting that responsibility, because we've had the same arguments about them having their own medication. I think there should be more push about them having more medication themselves, because they have to go out and look after themselves and be responsible for themselves. Some don't do it so well. But having that 7-day service where we've got the daytime resource to make sure that we're doing the recovery, the holistic well-being, but we have to decide, are we more primary care from my teams, or are we going more towards acute, where you've got that 24/7, and then there'd be the same arguments around mental health, whereas my mental health nurses can't put hands on treatment if somebody's going through a psychotic phase, but if we have to section them out to mental health hospitals to be looked after appropriately. And I think that's where we have to be mindful of the different tiers, the different models of care, and what our colleagues outside of prison are for. And I don't think prisoners should be treated any different from if they were staying at home, and they should have the same access to services as you and I. So that would be out of hours or 999. And it's not about being, we try and keep them within prison for as long as we can, that they're not just going back and forth, because we don't want that ping pong. But I still think they should have that free-flowing movement of the same type of care that you and I would get.
Okay, thank you. Rona Mackay.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, just sort of picking up on what you're saying, and this is probably one for Rhoda and Leona. I think it was last week in an evidence session we heard that people with substance addiction issues could not access mental health care, and I found that surprising. And I just wondered if you could. I know that in your submissions, HSCP have said that doesn't happen. Wonder if you could maybe clear that up for us and what the complexities of that is.
I can definitely say for Forth Valley, the 3 prisons that it would never stop them from accessing mental health. My team are integrated, and that is mental health and addictions always come hand in hand. But it's looking at the person as an individual and tailoring that proper package of care to them. They can self-refer whenever they want for mental health, sexual health, addictions. So there would be there is no blockages. If somebody self-refers for anything.
Overlap. There is an overlap then between, one doesn't block out the other.
No.
That's really encouraging. I mean, I'm thinking particularly in women in prison. Most, so many people have been mental health issues when they come in, and substance abuse issues. And I was just concerned when I heard that might be the case. That was the process.
We would look at the person as a whole. We wouldn't just pick out certain parts.
So it depends individual needs. That's
and what
really
they want
good
at that time as well. Because even if they may not be ready to do some further work in that particular field, they might not be at that ready state to do some low-level work, or it depends on where the person is in their journey, really. So
there's not a policy that you have addiction issues. You won't.
Not at all.
Great, thank you.
I can just
Sure,
I can
yes.
concur with that, and that's the same within GGC. We don't have integrated teams, but they're co-located. They work together very closely, and they're not mutually exclusive.
Great, that's good. And the other thing I was going to ask was, with the sort of, I suppose you could call it crisis of drugs in prison now. I mean, do you think prison staff have suitable training to deal with all the eventualities that occur from that, whether it's medical, even their own, psychological issues with what they have to deal with? Is the training up to it?
I think what we've heard from our colleagues, and I know the Prison Officers Association spoke to this last week, and the change of the role that there has been, I think, for prison officers over the time, and we've heard, we want to focus on relationships, and you've heard that unpredictability that people are finding. I know that Gillian Walker, the Governor who spoke last week, then the staff not always knowing what they're going to be opening up to in the morning, how people are going to be presenting. We have picked up, you will know that we are seeking to be a trauma-informed organisation, so we have changed our training, particularly for new starts coming in, but across all levels of our staff, to look at what we provide in terms of trauma training around substance misuse, naloxone training. So we are very clear that our staff are not medical. That's not what they are there. That's what our NHS colleagues are there to do. What we can work with our colleagues and also in third sector. But our training certainly has changed to support the changing role of the prison officer and the numerous asks that we are putting on our staff on a daily basis. Alongside that, we are working very much to ensure that there are spaces for them as well to be able to recover and to respond to what they are seeing, because our staff care about the people who are in prison, and seeing people sometimes presenting in the way that they are and the things that they're going through can be traumatic for them as well. So we have been focusing and working with our trade union partners about what more support we can give to staff in their establishments and also nationally as well, to support them with what they are dealing with. And again, one of the things we would hope and that we have seen particularly in Dumfries and Grampian is changing that working model. It allows people more time off, so still within the 35-hour working week, but it gives them longer periods of time off to be able to recover and restore as well, because we are very conscious that what we're asking of our staff on a daily basis is different from where it was before, and it is very pressurised just now.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask it's a fairly random question, but I'd be interested in your response. I think we're aware, and you'll be aware, of the very different model and sort of culture of prisons in Scandinavia, Norway, for example. I'm not suggesting for a minute things could change overnight here with our overcrowded prisons, but what I'm really asking is, would you look to that to try and pick up instances of good practice, obviously in a different environment that they do?
We are really keen to learn from other jurisdictions. We engage with, particularly through the Europris network, which brings together a lot of the European jurisdictions to learn from there. We are always keen to see other models and what they are looking at and how we can learn from them, and reach out to other jurisdictions as well around learning and best practice. And we recently had the European Council for Prevention of Torture doing inspection as well, and we asked them specifically for examples of good practice that they have seen through their inspection so that we can learn. So we would always be looking to see what we can learn from other nations.
It would seem like it would be radical transformational change that would have to happen here to get the conditions and the culture that they have in some of these countries, which is not what we have now. It seems like we've been traditionally operating in the same way for a long time, albeit staff are, obviously trained differently. So yeah, I mean, I hope that comes at some point, but it's not going to happen overnight, that's for sure. Rhoda, yeah.
I think some of the great work that's happened with the community custody units for women tells us a bit about how things could be done a bit differently. I mean, and that's hugely resource intensive, though. You've got a fabulous service for 24 individuals at any one time, certainly the one in Glasgow. I think Dundee one's 16. These, and I mean, it'd be unrealistic to think that Scotland could build lots of these for male inmates as well. But I think there's something to be learned from that, and think, how can we take that and in a sensible way, take that approach that in a gradual way, and work towards, well, what could our prison system look like? And from Ilona's absolutely right, what should the health component of that be, so that we deliver best outcomes for everyone? Because that's what we all are here to try to achieve.
Really interesting. Thank you. Thanks, Gabriel.
I wonder if I can just come in with a question. I think it was Linda, you spoke about sort of the importance of relationships, and that's something that's come up throughout the inquiry in terms of the really sort of critical role that a relationship between a prisoner and a prison officer or a member of staff can have. But in evidence, we have heard about this sort of disruptive nature of prison transfers. So, we understand the reason why transfers take place, but obviously, there's a sort of unintended consequence of that in terms of the potential to disrupt a relationship that's really working well. So, I mean, is that something that you're aware of, and are there ways that transfers can be kept to a minimum, or that issue around, or that benefit of relationships can be considered when a transfer is being proposed?
I'll ask my colleagues to come in as well. We do recognise that we are undertaking far more transfers than we would want to do just now, particularly because of overcrowding. As Sarah spoke to, when we see serious organised crime, people we need to keep separate, move around. So we are doing far more transfers than we would like to. There is work that we can do around transfers, and I think sometimes transfers can also be beneficial to people as well. I'll allow my colleagues to pick up in a bit more detail about how we try and support that continuity of care where we can.
And it will depend on the reason for transfer. I think when it's unexpected or in response to either an incident or difficulty managing different groups or any enemies, it will feel disruptive, and the work has to then be done to try and ensure as best as possible that you have continuity either of care or case management. I think in other areas where we do transfers, we will do transfers particularly around progression, potentially to access, albeit very limited, interventions. And those transfers are then made considering a case and considering what the appropriate needs of that individual are. So there are almost two sides to this. Unexpected absolutely will feel disruptive. In terms of other transfers, then it's actually at the heart of decision making to support somebody's progression.
And I suppose just on that, I mean, we did hear that, as you say, a sort of counter-argument where for some prisoners, and we understand the sort of geographical model that exists within the prison estate. So in the main, people from the North East will end up in prison in HMP Grampian, for example. but we heard from prisoners about the benefit of being accommodated in a prison that is out with their home area, and that I suppose is to do perhaps with family complexities, family breakdown, and you know, some of the dynamics that can be difficult for a prisoner. So it's interesting to hear that that can be something that is considered in the sort of transfer policy, if you like.
I think your point talks to the point that people are individuals, and so everybody's circumstances will differ, and it's why it's important for us to have the ability to have positive time for relationships rather than having to deal with very transactional duties that overcrowding brings, because when you have those relationships, you will understand better, and there's always opportunities. You know, we might seem like a very difficult and structured environment, but there are always opportunities for those relationships to bring about creative solutions, and sometimes that doesn't always bring about the solution that somebody wishes. Sometimes those decisions might be made because of risk and risk reduction. But certainly relationships are key.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, in you come, Leona.
To bring in, because about the therapeutic relationships, I would welcome that SPS discussed with NHS when people are going to be transferred to look at their healthcare needs, their care, for instance, around Hep C treatment, where it's a 13-week treatment. So we used to be included pre-COVID in many discussions because it's a lot of money per month for that person, and if they go to certain health boards, that treatment might be stopped. But it's the same around for the addiction services to make sure that there's that transition of care as well. So normally my team will find out, say somebody's transferred to Low Moss or to Perth, and then it's not until they've actually gone that then Perth Health Centre will phone. It's not that we can't share the information, it would be just good to know if we had that communication about if it's going to be more beneficial for them to move or not more beneficial, and at least get their care package pulled together so that it can be passed on.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's helpful to kind of understand that. Maybe there is a sort of delay, but it's not sort of insurmountable, if you like. I wonder if I can just to kind of finish up with a couple of questions. And one's coming back to the focus day, and we kicked off our meeting earlier on. Linda, I think you sort of outlined where things were going with the focus days. Just to be a bit daft lassie, I wonder if you could just explain the terminology around regime and roster operational review. So just for the clarity of members, what does that mean?
So it is to look, I think we looked at, as I said, a national project called the Focus Day. In discussion with our trade union colleagues, we've changed that to be locally and to focus particularly on the regime and roster. So looking at it slightly differently, but with the same overall objective of what we're trying to achieve around increased stability, security, and continue around the offer that we have for those in our care and for our staff. So it will be looking at specifically staff deployment, so the hours that people are working on a daily basis and then on a shift basis over the week, and how we can do that to maximise the time during the day, to have more staff on available during the day to allow them to be able to access more services, to be able to work with partners and bring people to more services. So it will be specific to, and that's why it will be looked at locally, because obviously, as you will know, every prison has a very different makeup. So what's required within shots, for example, I know you had Gillian as the governor here last week. What they require for long-term men will be different from what the short-term enrolment would be requiring for service. So it's to allow that to happen at a local level regarding the needs of the cohorts within each prison. But it will be specifically looking at the staffing model that they use on a daily basis.
Will that still mean, though, that there is a likelihood that prisoners will be locked up essentially for longer? You know, is that sort of inevitable, even though, you know, you're looking at how you can really maximise the sort of effectiveness of your staff deployment? Is there still a risk that inevitably people will be locked up for longer than you would want?
think I don't think we do accept just now as an organisation that people are being locked up for too long. Yeah. So this is us trying to tackle the fact that people are being locked up during the day when they should be going to services, and we're not able to offer that just now. So this will mean being locked up more in the evening, but it will operate a guaranteed offer within the working day to ensure people have more access there. We will want to keep this under review. This is very much a tactical response that we are doing to the numbers that we have within our care just now. And that would be one of the things we would commit to, is to keep things under review, but it is to try and increase the offer of time out of cell, because we know just now that is not something that we're consistently being able to deliver.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Just a final question from me, and then I'll just bring in any other see Rona's indicating, but just a final question from me. Just going back to MAT standards, maybe Rhoda, I'll come to you. Obviously, the prison alcohol and drug recovery strategy states that obviously the implementation of MAT standards in prisons is a priority, and rightly so, and that the aim is that is completed by April next year, as I understand it. But we've taken some evidence that that's quite an ambitious target. So I'm just interested in what your views are on that, and if realistically there will be.
But work has commenced with the MIST team nationally to look at how we implement it. And in fairness, some of it is implemented already, so we're not starting from ground zero. There's been quite a lot of work ongoing, looking at when the MAT standards first came out and actually benchmarking ourselves against them. So some we've actually achieved, but obviously it's a bit like the Forth Bridge. You've got to constantly make sure that you're actually always on top of that and you're not letting anything slip. But that I would say that April 2026 might be a bit ambitious, but the work is ongoing to try and achieve this.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Rona Mackay, do you want to come in?
Just very briefly. I'm just interested in the sort of demographic. If you could give us a picture, I don't know if you can, but on the sort of age, the sort of average age of, say, offenders going into POM and substance abuse or substance addiction. Is that different from, say, Barlinnie? Or, I'm trying to get an impression of how many more young people are becoming into that, or is it generally middle-aged, older people? Anybody?
I don't know if you do, Susie.
I don't have any
statistics. There's nothing jumps out that it's mainly middle-aged people or anything like that?
No, but if you looked at the age profile of people who've got problems as a result of their drug or alcohol use, you would be looking from your mid-20s to mid-30s as being the key population, but that might be a highest number of... That might be the number of people that we've got is actually the highest number within that area as well.
Sure.
It's certainly, I think for us it's about trying to track what that looks like, but I don't have any set statistics that I could share with you today.
If there was anything that you could say, it's definitely older people, or we've got an alarming number of young people coming in, but there's nothing that jumps out in that.
And I think what we would do is we would be aware of the risks for all of those who come in, because their own histories, their own trauma histories that bring them into prison, and just recognising that some people are at different risk factors for everybody. So we try not to focus too much on particular age groups, because then you could lose sight of others who are also, so it's about dealing with people as individuals, as our health colleagues identified earlier, that the importance of understanding for that person where they're at and what we can do to meet that.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no more questions from members, if there's anything that our panel members want to just conclude with, now's the time. If not, can I thank you all very much for your contributions this morning. It's been a really interesting session. So I'm going to suspend for 5 minutes to allow our panel to leave before we consider a negative SSI in public, and then we'll move into private. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, members. So our next item of business is consideration of a negative statutory instrument, which is the Firefighters Pensions Remedial Service Scotland Amendment number 2 Regulations of 2025, and that's SSI number 187. So I refer members to paper 4, which sets out the purpose of this instrument. And I know that the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee made no comments on the substance of the instrument, rather their comments related to minor defective drafting. So can I just ask members whether members wish to make any other recommendations in relation to this negative instrument? Otherwise, are we content that this comes into force? All content? Yes. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so that brings the public part of the meeting to a close. Next week we'll be continuing to take evidence as part of our inquiry into the harm caused by substance use in Scottish prisons. So we now move into private session.